Hi, everyone. Welcome to the TROPT Webcast. I'm Lourdes Turrecha, founder of the Rise of Privacy Tech, or TROPT, as we like to fondly abbreviate here. I am really excited about today's episode. In June, we're exploring more about developer privacy tech. That's the theme that we have this month. That we have, a few events and a few things going on here. We'll be at Pepper, the conference next week for privacy engineering discussions, and we have a couple webcast episodes on this. But today, in particular, I'm really excited to dig deeper into privacy code scanners with Privado CEO Vaibhav Antil. V, welcome to the TROPT Webcast, and thank you for spending time with us today.
Thanks for having me, Lourdes. Super excited to talk about what we're building at Privado and share with the TROPT community.
Absolutely. I'd like to start where I usually start with other founders and other privacy technologists. I'm curious, how did you end up in privacy tech? How did you end up building here? Why privacy? What moved you to start building solutions to privacy problems?
Yeah, so that's an amazing question. And everyone I've spoken to also over the years who are working like you in privacy have their own interesting story of how they sort of got into privacy. So mine is similar actually. Prior to starting Privado, I was working in a consumer tech company in a product role. So a lot of financial data flowed through my systems and I was working with data. And even then, so while the company was based out of India, even there, the impact of GDPR was super disruptive. And I could actually see how painful it was to build the right tooling and get to compliance, right? And especially I could see it very closely because the privacy and the legal team would try to get some tooling done, but then those tasks would sort of get deprioritized, and it was super difficult for everyone to understand what to build, etc. So so that was the context, but my trigger actually happened because the Indian government decided to put a privacy bill in our parliament, which is the personal data protection bill, which has gone through some cycles and hopefully will get passed maybe this or the next year. And that's how the journey of privacy really started for me. I had seen that context. The Indian government had said that we'll pass a privacy law, and but when I sort of dig deep in, I realized that globally all privacy laws converge, and it's the same set of principles that you have to look at the same set of principles across Europe, across US. There might be slight divergences in data residency, etc., but more or less you're about the same principles. And that's how we when I although I started from the Indian privacy law in mind, but quickly changed our focus to GDPR, CCPA, global privacy. And that's how privacy happened for me. Privacy tech happened for me because of my own experiences working in companies. So being working with engineers and being from a product role, my lens of solving for privacy compliance was slightly different and was more of a product engineering sort of lens to it. And that's why we ended up building this code scanning product, which we'll talk about more as we chat. I think you're on mute, Lotus.
Oh, thank you for that. Absolutely. My dog was barking, so I wanted to make sure he wasn't disturbing you. But yeah, I can't wait to dig deeper into privacy code scanners. But you mentioned something that I just can't resist unpacking and touching on first, which is how privacy laws have fueled privacy tech, right? Like we saw that happen leading up to GDPR. Some of the bigger privacy tech startups have come out to say that they owe their existence to GDPR. And it sounds like your inspiration, or one of the things that fueled the creation of Privado, was the Indian bill that was introduced. But you're absolutely right. Like, all these laws might be very different when it comes to the specific, but the overarching principles when it comes to privacy have always been consistent across the board. Do you see that in terms of you started with the Indian one, but you're also looking now globally with GDPR and CCPA/CPRA. Do you
Yep.
see do you see what's that like? Because I've talked to practitioners about building a privacy program that accounts for the commonalities and the differences in the laws all over the world, and that's quite difficult. But what's that
Yeah.
like from a founder building a solution that helps with all of those. So it's kind of, it's, I had this discussion with some practitioners yesterday, and it's hard. Like there's no one size fits all, but what's that like trying to figure out a solution that would enable your customers to target or to comply with specific provisions of these global laws?
Sure. So the way we think about this problem is we divide the problem of privacy or into two buckets. One is about the customer data that you're trying to protect and add privacy or do data protection around. So that's actually objective. So even if you remove
Mm-hmm.
any law, the reality of how you collect data, who you share it with, where you store it, if you are leaking it to logs or if you are collecting more data than you need, all of that is the objective truth. So that is something that we solve for as the first step. And then on top of it, then we have this rules engine, which sort of looks at different laws and says, okay, as per GDPR, if you have cookies on your SaaS dashboard, you need opt-in. But if you are in California, you need opt-out. So you can then layer rules on top of it. Uh, and then customers can pick and choose the regulation that they are in. I think even in my experience, what works best on the rule side of the house is that you try to either take an approach of sort of the most toughest law that you pick, and that takes care
Mm-hmm.
of everyone. And that's what we saw once post GDPR, CCPA, and now CPRA coming in. Like companies who complied with GDPR were sort of okay with the CCPA. So I think, yeah, that could be one strategy. But the way we solve for that is we really like to solve the data problem first. What's the data? Who's collecting it? Where is it being shared? Because that is independent of the law. That is something that even if no law applies to you, you still want to protect. You still want to have some privacy for your end users, even if you are under no law today. And then, of course, you have the compliance side of the house where you're looking at it from more of a regulatory perspective and say, hey, this is my risk and this is how I can comply with the law.
Yeah. Uh, that's a great point that you're touching about. And I mean, there's compliance, right, with all these data protection laws. There's these laws that are fueling these tools that enable or help with compliance. That said, I would be remiss if I didn't make sure I say out there and clarify that no one tool is going to get companies compliant with all of these laws. They enable specific aspects of it. A tool might go with DSARs and have a solution for DSARs, have a solution for PAA, have a solution for automating workflows. Um, but I'm curious, how did you end up building privacy code scanners in particular and not one of these other buckets or categories? Or I guess let's take a few steps back. What is a privacy code scanner? Like if you were going to explain it to an 8-year-old child, how do you explain what you're building?
Sure. So before I get into the privacy code scanning piece, I really want to sort of agree with the point of having multiple tools for the privacy world. So if you look at security, they don't buy one tool and say that now we'll be secure, right? So for each
Hmm.
kind of problem, they have the specialized tool. So I think that's where the
Right.
privacy market is moving as well, where you have specific problems. For each problem, you will end up acquiring specific tools, and then they have to talk to each other in a nice way so that you're not repeating the same work across tools. But so agree with you there as well. And off to your
And
question
you're
on.
Yeah, I mean, I would just before we jump into the privacy code scanner, because you make such a great point. I come from cybersecurity too, and it took forever to have players even try to do a platform approach. It's very early in the privacy space for that because we need best in class, right? Like you need the best tool for DSARs, and I guess the challenge now is to ensure that all of these solutions that are built by different startups are actually interoperable. That's one of the points that buyers have shared with us at Trope, is to ensure that those startups are talking to each other, because then they end up with solutions that aren't actually the best in each category. So you make such a great point there. That's one of the lessons that we should take from the adjacent cybersecurity space, which is more mature and 10 to 15 years ahead of us here in privacy tech. But now let's jump into privacy code scanners. How do you explain that to a child? What are you building?
So yeah, let me take an attempt there. I don't know if it's still possible to or like a child will understand it or not, but yeah. So let's assume like the privacy professional is like a doctor. So then our code scanner is like an X-ray or an MRI, right? And like a doctor will
Mm.
look at the X-ray and say, or an MRI and say, hey, this is what is broken and prescribe medication. Privado is something similar, wherein a privacy person can act like a doctor on a product, run the X-ray and see, okay, this is where I'm collecting data, this is where it is getting shared, and prescribe the privacy control as medication to the product and engineering team to build in privacy control. So uh, I think that could be like one way to explain, but I'm not sure how well I did it. But if I,
That's such a great analogy. Go ahead.
but I was saying that if I have to now explain to the privacy professionals who've been doing this for some time in a more detailed way, or double clicking on the code scanner itself. So like a privacy code scanner has two parts, right? One is the code scanning bit, and the second is privacy. So first of all, for like anyone who's worked in a software company, code scanning has been around since a long time,
Yep.
and it's nothing but a simple technology which will analyze the code that developers have written and give back some information. So if you are working in IP or legal, you would have typically seen a code scanner for open source license compliance.
Mm-hmm.
At the time of M&A, that used to happen. If you acquire a company, you will find if there are some IP violation. Now it happens continuously. If you work in security, you're finding security vulnerabilities with code scanning. If you're working in technology, if you are the CTO of a company, you're looking at code quality. So code scanning has been around for some time, and different use cases have been addressed by that. We are trying to solve the privacy use case. And when we say the privacy use case, it's basically looking at the complete life cycle of personal data. So what personal data is used, which means what's being collected, what's being shared, where is it being stored, are there any leakages to logs, to keyboard caches, to console files, and what's the complete journey of data. And then on top of it, you are trying to also see, okay, what are the corresponding risks, what are the corresponding liabilities that we have. Those are extra things, but at the heart of it, a privacy code scanner is something which will give you the customer data information or the personal data information for any product or any application that your engineer has built.
Thank you for that. And so I'm curious, are the use cases you're targeting your customers' own products that you scan, or do you enable scanning of their vendors' products as well? Like, what are the use cases that the Privado privacy code scanner handle, or now or in the next 18 months? I'm conscious that you're also building a roadmap for capabilities and features in the future. So I'm curious, like, what are those use cases that at least the first few ones are the ones that you've got planned that would be covered under your roadmap?
Sure. So our generally customers are software companies, since we are a code scanner. So software companies who are developers and building products. And so essentially
Mm-hmm.
it's for any product which is built internally. So this is not targeting any third
Yeah.
party SaaS apps.
Yeah.
It's the
Makes
product
sense.
that engineers are building, right? And it could be a B2C company which is building for their consumers, or it could be a B2B company which is building for the rest of the company. So it doesn't really matter as long as you're building your own product. Privado
Mm-hmm.
is sort of focused on you. And we sort of have two personas there. So one is the engineer or the developer, which is the actual end customer, whose life, one of our key goal is to make their life easier, to reduce the friction for them to understand privacy risk in the product that they're building. And then the second one is the chief privacy officer, the privacy team, privacy engineers, even security and GRC teams, who are interested, whose core job is to make sure privacy is there in the product, right? So we're trying to see what are they complying with laws, what is the privacy risk, what the data flows, things like those. So these are our two basically personas in a company and the kind of company we go after. Um, and from
Yeah.
a use case perspective,
Go ahead. The use case perspective. You actually read my mind, because one of my other questions is like, who is your customer persona? From a use case perspective, go ahead.
yeah, sure. So from a use case perspective, it's actually not much different from what privacy teams are trying to do currently manually or using surveys. So essentially,
Mm,
like any company who's trying to become compliant, the first thing that they're trying to do is map personal data, right? So like, where is my personal data being used? How is it flowing? Where is it getting shared? Things like those. And if I have to just double click on where we are in the privacy tech sort of landscape, I think the usage of personal data or detecting usage of personal data will become more and more important. I'll take an example of the recent Twitter fine by FTC. It was because
mm,
phone numbers were being collected for two-factor authentication, but then there was a backend service which was using it for
right.
marketing. So it's not that you don't know you have phone number in your database. It's that it's not about data discovery of that phone number. It's about discovering the use of that phone number in a in an actual product or application that your engineers have built. And that's super tough today because that takes months. So
Yeah.
that's the first use case that we go into, an organization into, is that they've been spending some time sending surveys to engineers, and they generally become very difficult to get responses back. So they implement Privado. Within next 30 minutes, they start getting information on across all the products, what data they are using, who they are sharing it with, if it's getting stored somewhere or read somewhere. And then, of course, they try to do some ancillary use cases like, okay, now we have this service and we need to generate, for transparency purposes, a record of processing activity report, or we have a mobile app and we want to generate a data safety report or a Apple privacy nutrition label report or a privacy policy.
Mhm.
Um, or they just want to know what the third party data sharing situation is. So the first use case really is about mapping this personal data usage and flow, and then the corresponding reporting and all of that layer on top of it.
Oh, very cool. And as someone who has had to do that manually in previous lives before the rise of privacy tech, I would, you said they're so very similar. I would disagree. I think this is like the 2.0 version of the manual process, which makes our lives so much, you know, more easy when it comes to having accurate data that your product is collecting, and having it up to date as opposed to outdated. Because as you write new code and release new versions, new personal data elements could be collected. So this seems like something that that exercise would, if I'm remembering correctly, would take like at least 4 to 6 months, and even then
Oh
no
yeah.
one is sure, right? No one is sure if it's actually accurate or outdated.
True, Lourdes. In fact, like this is so spot on. It'll take 6 to 8 months, and then we have had this conversation about out of date Article 30 reports, stale data flow
Yep.
diagrams that nobody wants to touch, but they have created it and shown it internally. So we want to really empower the privacy teams in removing this data gathering exercise. So say, hey, you get the data picture automatically. Now look at it and say, is this data lawful? Or what privacy controls we need to add, and because that's where privacy teams shine, because they can take the users sort of point of view and say, if we are collecting this data, we need to have consent, or we can't collect this data, is this lawful or not? So rather than chasing data gathering, like spending time in data gathering, actually spend time in putting privacy control. So I would say that's the first use case that we focus on or go into companies. Another one that we've seen is, how do we mitigate privacy risks as the part of product development lifecycle, right? So how do we, so one way
Yep.
to do that is you do it at the design stage, right, which is possible
Yes.
for large features wherein you're doing a privacy impact assessment or a data protection impact assessment. But if you are a company which has a lot of engineers, you have a lot of moving parts. You have your
Mhm.
mobile apps, you have your internal system, someone is creating a dashboard, and not all of them will actually come to you as part of your design stage privacy review. So
Right.
the second thing we focus on is that, how do we make sure that rather than always asking engineers what they're doing, we show them that, hey, by the way, this change that you have done in which you are collecting device identifier, but for a very legit use case of removing fraud, is actually has some privacy risk, and we should speak to the privacy person about it. So that's the second use case that we go into. How can we make sure every code change that goes through to production goes through us, and if there is some privacy risk, we let the privacy team know, and we also empower the engineer to actually act on it and fix it. And then you can basically, again, the ancillary, the next version solution of that is, as a privacy team, you can put privacy guidance. So you can say, hey, whenever you collect location data, rather than collecting precise, if you are collecting course location, that's fine. If you're collecting precise location, go through our process, things like those. So that becomes the second most important use case. How do you embed privacy in your product development lifecycle? How do you do privacy risk assessment as the product is being built?
And that's certainly one of those trends that is pretty important. I think most of the products that we've seen come out of the privacy tech space is focused more on, once you have the data and what to do with that data. And oftentimes I've talked to many customers, privacy engineers, CPOs, DPOs, GRC folks, and they're like, at this point, it's too late. We should have thought about it during
Yep.
the development life cycle. And so this shift left trend that we highlighted in our white paper last year, is certainly one of those areas that we're very excited about, and I'm happy that there are builders like you who are building in the space and helping in shifting privacy left further towards the development lifecycle. It's one of those important areas. As someone who's practiced before, you can't keep throwing bodies at it, and you're right,
Yeah.
like not every time. It's still very manual to kind of insert yourself during the development lifecycle. Although that's still one of my favorite aspects of being a privacy practitioner is product privacy. But it would be nice to have something that would kind of clone people like the privacy practitioners out there, people like Nishant Bajaria at Netflix, you know who has to do the same thing when it comes to working with product teams. I'm
Yeah.
curious, what's the output there? I've seen different responses from different privacy tech vendors. How do you report risks, or like what are when it comes to that use case, which is the development lifecycle use case, and showing, I think you said, privacy risks to developers, what does that look like in terms of, is it a report? Is it a dashboard? Um, I'm curious what that looks like for them, and when do they use it? Which part of the development lifecycle is it? From during testing? Is it during build? I'm curious at what point there that would be most helpful.
Sure. So we actually insert ourselves super just after the design stage, which is the development stage.
Mm-hmm.
So as engineers are writing code, they would typically start pushing that or committing that to their code repository,
Yes.
and that's where we start reflecting back the risk. And the risk we show are in multiple ways. So it could be that, hey, you're building, and there are like two three kind of risks. So one is that you already had a product, let's say a service, internal service powering personalization of homepage of, let's say, Netflix, right? And then you now decided that we will take another user attribute, let's say gender, making this up for that. So that is something which is one kind of risk, where you're saying that we are increasing data processing for an existing product, and that's one kind of risk. Another kind of risk that we create is in which you are creating a net new product, wherein you do need to do a very very detailed privacy impact assessment. An example of that could
Mm-hmm.
be you have a customer support team, and you're building a dashboard for them so that they could go back, search for a customer and do some refund or look about them, and then build some experience. Now that requires a deeper collaboration between privacy and engineers. So that could be a second
Yes.
kind of uh, uh, risk. The third kind of risk is where you have some policies wherein you have said that, hey, these are our third parties, and you can actually approve certain data sharing with each using the DPAs that you might have. You can say that, hey, we are using Privado, and Privado is only allowed to get account data. And if anything else goes to Privado, that's something which is not allowed and needs an approval from us or needs some more assessment. So that is the third kind of, where you have set policies against which we can compare and create alerts and give guidance to the engineer.
Got it. Well, that's really cool that it's not just actually within the product, but also the connectors going out, the data sharing to external third parties or solutions that they integrate with that are also within scope. I'm curious, setting aside your current privacy code scanner, are there other types of categories that you would want to build in the future? And I'm mindful that you might not want to share this publicly, so feel free to pass on this question. What's the long-term vision for Privado? I mean, we start with a privacy code scanner today. If you could make everything happen that you want in your roadmap, what does that look like?
Sure. I think what we are doing is we're building this privacy stack for tech companies, and essentially it's basically almost like you have software as a service. It's like privacy as a service for developers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wherein they have something that they can run on their local machines, run a scan, and find issues and fix them. So it's basically converting privacy, which was the domain of the privacy team, and done via surveys, to something which is actionable and in the hands of developers. That's where we want to move, and that
Right.
gives everyone a lot of freedom and accountability. So even on a roadmap, that's the lens that we generally take, in terms of, like, if you have to enter any part of the privacy problem, we'll only enter if it is something which is not solved for the developer today, and is something that we can offer as SDKs or libraries for them, and build like this complete stack, which is more of privacy as a service. That's the general vision and thought process
Well,
of how we are thinking.
oh, that's exciting. Can't wait to see what you guys end up building in the next few years. You know, rooting for you, excited that you guys found, you found one of your advisors through the rise of privacy tech. So shout out to Deborah Farver. I can't resist but ask, what is it like working with a privacy domain expert as you build your solutions? I'm curious how that's been like for you. I mean, my thesis has been, the more expertise you get from someone who has worked in the space and who knows what the problems are, the better the products turn out to be. It's kind of like a hack when it comes to market research. I'm not saying you don't have to do market research. You still have to talk to customers, but you kind of have someone internal who has that customer perspective. What's that been like to work with someone like Deborah?
Oh yeah, of course, it's been super helpful. And I think on a couple of axes. One is, of course, as you said, building the right product. So I mean, you're not building
Mm-hmm.
in like a sort of like in your own ivory tower. You whatever you are even thinking, you can pass it around. And then if you need like secondary research, you can take some help and like especially the initial vetting part of it. You still have to do market research. You have to still do your own research, but it
Absolutely.
really helps to get that first look. I think also, how do you think about marketing the product to privacy professionals? I think that lens also
Mm-hmm.
becomes super helpful because, as founders, you're trying to reach and go to the most amount of people, get as many customers as possible, leads, but you are in the privacy domain and you have to demonstrate what you are. So that's another interesting, because that's always a challenge between the two. So talking through certain ideas and figuring out, hey, this is fine or not, that also helps a lot. So I would say these two, and then of course, like, startups have their own lows and highs, so just living through those as well.
Yeah, just having the additional support. I've loved, I mean, as a founder myself, I've loved working with Deborah. So I wanted to kind of chat about how it was like for you. So it sounds like we're both big fans. And it looks like she's actually watching us. So hello, Deborah Farber, and thank you for
Hey,
supporting
Deborah.
both TROPT and Privado. Um, I feel like we can go on talking forever, but we should probably try to wrap up soon. I learned so much from the use cases that you guys, the privacy problems that you're solving, from not just, you know, the product scanning it for mapping, but also shifting privacy left when it comes to the development lifecycle and having a tool for developers to look at the privacy risks that they're creating as they build products so that they can do something about it. Um, Before we wrap up, one last question. Outside, and you can be playful about this. Outside your own products, like the roadmap that we just talked about, if you could snap your fingers, what is one privacy tech product you wish existed? And this could be, as playful as possible. I've had silly answers from this question that were might be fantastical. But I'm curious, what's one personal privacy problem that you have that you wish you had a tool for?
Okay. Oh yeah, I didn't anticipate this one, but
I can share
maybe
mine. I wish there was like for example, I wish that if I were walking around, that there was like some sort of shield that I could do where it blocks all of the facial recognition in public. That could be like a future consumer privacy tech product.
Sure. I mean, nothing comes to my mind, but I think maybe on the business side, I can at least
Yeah, of
talk about
course.
something that I wish existed as, and that's not more from a tech or a tool perspective, but more from like like just community coming around and trying to solve certain things. So I think like
Mm-hmm.
we have this amazing security vulnerability database built over the years by OWASP and other
Mm,
organizations, right? On the privacy side, there is an OWASP for privacy, but that's still a lot of process driven things. So basically, if we would have had that in terms of actual privacy vulnerabilities that you could find, and even bug bounty programs for privacy, that would actually enforce privacy really well. Because in my opinion, companies want to do privacy, but we have to make it easier for everyone to
mm-hmm.
understand it and make it more simpler. So like those rules actually help a lot, in the security world. So having
Right.
like a database like that on the privacy side, I think would be super cool and something that could really push the boundaries.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we want it to be easier. And like you're saying, there are already security vulnerability libraries. We'd love to have those in the privacy space as well. Vaibhav, I've learned so much about what you guys are building at Privado. So thank you for sharing that with us today and with the Trip community. Before we wrap up, I'd love to ask you to share any calls to action or any last comments that you may have with the Trip community, where you guys can be found if you want to be found, um, and anything else that's coming up for you guys that we should keep an eye out.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if anyone wants to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not sure where I can share my profile, or someone from my team will. And then,
Okay.
if anyone wants to see how our product works, we would love to get on a call. You can come on our website, see what our product is, read our case study, and just schedule a demo. We'd be happy to walk you through different use cases, and how our product solves that actually.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And don't forget, your co-founder Prashant and Deborah will be speaking at the upcoming TROPT Summit at the Rosewood Menlo Park in on June 29th. So if anyone would like to talk to them in person, they'll be there. I'm sure the team will also be on virtually on Hopin to answer any questions or to connect with you guys at the upcoming summit. So thank you everyone for tuning in today. It's been such a pleasure to get to know Vaibhav and to pick his brain as to what they're building at Privado. And we hope to see you at future Trope webcast episodes and future Trope events. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.